Okay, so let's talk about auditing versus attest versus assurance services. So we have these kind of concentric circles, which I really like this visual because auditing is just a very special type of attestation, and attestation is a very special type of assurance. So technically all of the services we talk about are falling within the assurance bucket, but not everything can be a test and not everything can be an audit service. All right, so these are our formal definitions of auditing, attest, and assurance services. So auditing, our technical definition here is that it's a systematic process of objectively obtaining and evaluating evidence regarding assertions about economic actions and events to ascertain the degree of correspondence between those assertions and established criteria. All right, what does that mean? Okay, well, basically it means we are going to go through and objectively look at all this information, right? All this financial information included in the financial statements, and determine if these financial statements are presented fairly, truthfully, in accordance with GAAP, right? Okay. And this obviously is a US-centric definition, so I apologize for that. But you get the idea. So when it talks about, right, looking at the assertions about economic actions and events, that's talking about the financial statements. And then when it talks about comparing those actions and events, financial statements, to established criteria, it's talking about comparing them to US GAAP or IFRS, etc. Okay, so basically the auditor's job is to look at these financial statements, everything in them, and make sure they are in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. Okay, for attest services, all right, so remember we are pulling back now and attest is more general. So this is just when a practitioner is engaged to issue a report on a subject matter that's the responsibility of someone else. Okay, so we can see how audit fits in within that, right? But attestation is more broad, right? Because auditors can issue multiple different types of reports on a variety of subjects, right? So one of the things about attest is this isn't limited to economic events or actions. So this goes beyond just me issuing an opinion on the financial statements. But an important part of this definition is the fact that a report is issued. Okay, so if I'm not issuing a report, but I'm still doing some type of service, then it can fall into the assurance services definition, right? Which is basically very general compared to these other two. And that assurance services are independent professional services that improve quality of information or its context for decision makers. So again, you can see how audit fits into that definition. But it can also be things like consulting on risk assessment or how well a healthcare system is performing. I think in the book there's an example where you are looking at like a nursing home to determine whether care is of high quality, and that something like that could fall within assurance services. Okay, so what's the focus of this course? So much to the disappointment of some people who really want to learn about internal audit, this course is primarily about external auditing. Throughout the course, we'll talk about both how to audit SEC registrants or public companies and private companies. Okay, and we'll talk about important differences between the two along the way. Now let's briefly talk about the major phases of the audit. Okay. So first we have client acceptance and continuance, right? This is when I actually get the client, or I have a client from last year and I decide I want to keep them from another year. Then I'll do these preliminary, what's known as preliminary engagement activities, which we'll talk more about in chapter 3. Then I can really get in there and plan the audit, which is when I'm gonna come up with like all the work steps I'm gonna do, all the accounts I'm gonna test, all the internal control systems I'm gonna test. Then once I've planned everything and assessed all my risks, I'm going to go and audit internal controls, right? Or do test of controls. Once I have test controls, figured out how well the control systems are operating, then I'm going to be comfortable moving on to audit individual accounts. So this is things like auditing the cash account, auditing accounts receivable, right? How do we know if those balances are right or wrong, right? Company told us they had $100 million in cash, and we, the auditor, have to verify they have $100 million in cash if they're going to put that on their financial statements and publish it in their 10K, right? And then after we audit all the accounts, we have kind of engagement wrap-up things that help us complete the audit, which is chapter 17. And then chapter 18, last but not least, is when we issue our audit report. Okay, so this is generally a one-page report, which for the most part just says, hey, everything's okay. These financial statements are presented fairly in accordance with GAAP. And that's generally what the outside world is going to see as that report. Okay, so that's it for chapter 1, and I will see you next time for chapter 2.